Yo, what is up guys? Welcome back and welcome to the channel as usual. Today, as promised, we will be covering the gearing system and how gearing should work on release. And I feel like this is a very important video because this not will only cover the traits that you need to also keep an eye out for that are the business slot, but at the same time will also make you avoid some mistakes, because I know that a lot of us right now are preparing for release, and I'm sure a lot of you are like looking up some guides, looking up some builds, and you'll be disappointed once you get into the game and realize that most of those builds that you've been looking up are actually not accessible due to the fact that there will be a milestone system. If you don't know what the milestone is, I've already covered that in the last video which I uploaded yesterday, which is about the endgame loop. Do check that out, learn about the milestone system. However, real quick, let's say for example I need to get a full Ghost Wolf set or whatever it may be. Ghost Wolf, for those of you that know, let's say here we have the top piece. Now, some of you will be checking some guides and you will see, okay, like 2 pieces Ghost Wolf or 4 pieces set Ghost Wolf or whatever it may be. And then once you get into the game, you realize that almost every single piece that you're looking for is not accessible because the milestone unlocks things on day-to-day basis. So basically, some job that could be from a world boss that exists, the world boss would not even be available on release, or some job that you might be getting, even blue items that you might want to get, might not be available because they're locked, for example, behind the open world dungeon that is not available. Let's say in this case, for example, if you look at Shadow Crypt, and then you look at these mobs over here, some of the drops, let's say you want Bloody Fog Leather, you would notice it's dropping from here. Guess what? This place is not going to be available right off the bat on release. It might be available in a couple days, maybe a couple weeks even. So that's why it's really important to be aware that the builds that you check online, you need to also know if those pieces are acquirable or not. And that's why it's really important to also build a pacing for your build. So like initially, for example, phase 1, first couple days, first day to 2 days, you will have a mix of greens and blues. Day 2, for example, you'll have a mix of blues, greens and purples, and then eventually you hit the full blue, then the full purple mark, or full blue plus some purples, then the purple mark. So initially what you want to know is which items are dropping from your tier 1 dungeons, because that is where most of you are going to be grinding some of your pieces. Almost every single build in the game benefits from an item from one of those dungeons. So let's say, for example, I'm playing Crossbow Dagger. I have this item over here that is one of my business slot daggers in the game. So I will be able to access this on day 1 as long as I hit level 50. Same thing for this bracelet. That is business slot for a lot of DPS classes, meaning I could actually access this. Mother Nature, also a very good one. So be aware like which items are available in these dungeons, because you have like weapons, you have accessories, you have all that kind of stuff, and you need to be aware which ones are available in here, because those are easy to access and also easy to trade. That is going to be the #1 thing you include in your build. You also need to be aware of items such as Elite Resistance Top Piece, because this item over here, you'll be getting it from the main story anyway, so special resistance. So when you finish the story, you will be getting this item once you hit the end game, which gives you dexterity and hit 87, and that is also another very good item that you need in the game. This item is actually one of the best for some DPS or most DPS due to the fact that hit is really important early on. So most builds will actually include this item in their build when they are playing DPS. These are things that you all need to be aware of, and that's how you decide to build, because of knowing what is available where. So initially my tip to you would be to focus on some of the green accessories, meaning when you craft your accessories initially, you'll have one accessory. Let's say in this instance, for example, I'm speaking in case of your DPS, obviously that could differ from one person to another. You have crude, flame, and you have wind. You could keep wind because of the hit and trade it even, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna craft 1 ring each, and that will lead me to the lithograph segment. So some of those items that you want to acquire will be through the lithograph. So initially, the best ring for almost every single DPS is called Lethal Fortune Ring, which is right here. So initially, almost every single DPS will want to have this ring, meaning you will just craft 1 ring each of the green rings, and then you will be able to craft the lethal fortune ring. And this ring you will keep for a while. You're not gonna have a better ring to replace it with, maybe even not until tier 2. I remember I continued using this ring, and so did so many other players, until tier 2 was released to give us better rings. So this ring for most DPS is just piston slot, hands down. And until you get your hand on a better ring, like the insightful ring that you see on the right here, the purple ring, or transcendent, or whatever it may be, you'll be using a green ring, for example the one with the head that I showed earlier, which is crude wind band. Fully trade it, leave it there until you get your hands on a good purple ring. And in general, that is where you're going to access a lot of your blue gear. As you can tell, like if you craft 4 pieces of any green pieces, you'll be able to get the blue item. And also that is going to be the case for your weapons if you would like to get traits. However, my recommendation is you will be getting a blue elite resistance weapon from the main story anyway. The second weapon, do craft it, like do 4 greens and craft your second blue weapon as well, and then try to work towards your purple weapons as fast as you possibly can, because these bring such high value, and they are also easy to trade because these dungeons are doable on a daily basis with these points, the dimensional contract tokens, which once again I explained in the previous videos. So do check the previous 2 videos if you are lost with any of those systems. Now, let's talk about the traits, because there are, of course, some important traits that you need to keep an eye out for. So whenever you get traits initially, my tip for you would be, if you get a really juice trait, sell it if it's early on. Like, for example, let's say you do get a ring, and that ring has skill damage boost. Sell that skill damage boost purple. It will sell for an obnoxious amount of lucent that it's even better for you to sell it than keep it, because then eventually the prices will drop and then you can just make use of it. Obviously, if the prices turn out to be low for some reason, then we avoid selling and just use it right away. However, the traits to keep an eye out for depends obviously on your role, but one trait that doesn't change on weapons is hit. Whenever you have a weapon, it must have hit on it. Hit is like basically the juice of every single weapon in the game. Every single role in the game needs hit, because evasion is really broken kind of in this game at the moment, and if you don't have enough hit, you will basically essentially be missing every single hit on the target you're hitting. So hit is like basically on the top of your list. In terms of DPS, hit, heavy attack, cooldown speed in my case, attack speed, and those traits are basically the most important. And also, if you don't know what items give what traits, you can click on the item, click on this icon over here that says trait list, and that will show you what traits you can unlock. So hit, critical hit, heavy attack, and cooldown speed are really good for most builds. If you are playing crossbow dagger, cooldown speed is not bad. Hit, critical hit, and heavy attack is good for almost every single DPS in the game. Cooldown speed is also good for staff users as well. If you are a greatsword user, hit, critical hit, heavy attack is basically like your go-to. Some attack speed is also fine if you're a greatsword dagger, because attack speed is also useful. So these are the most important traits in terms of weapons. In terms of gear, however, you would mostly go for defensive traits, because of the fact that this is what you're going to be using for PvP. So mostly you either go evasion or endurance. Now, how to decide that? A simple TLDR would be, if you are playing dagger, it's recommended that you go evasion, due to the fact that dagger can yield you high evasion results. If you don't have a dagger in your kit, let's say you are a sword and shield great swords, for example, or a staff bow, or whatever it may be, then I recommend you go endurance. However, the only exception is the early game. The early game, if you're gonna fully trait your blue pieces, then you could actually go evasion regardless of what role you're gonna be playing. And the reason for that is because hit is really hard to stack early on until you get full purple, and even then it's hard to stack. So evasion is kind of the bread and butter of like being tanky and unkillable initially. So you could do that if you want. However, simple TLDR is evasion if you're dagger, endurance if you're not dagger. That does not mean you cannot go one way or another if you are playing dagger. It's just that this is what's preferred. So you would be focusing on evasion. You would be focusing on things like max health. So you would need things like max health, range evasion, melee evasion, debuff duration, endurance like melee, range, magic. You need to also be aware that when it comes to gear, if you have an armor piece, for example, this one is an armor plate piece. Armor plate pieces give you only ranged and melee. So if you look at this item, you would get ranged evasion and you would get melee endurance and melee evasion. You cannot get magic evasion. If you look, however, on leather items, you would realize real quick that you get magic evasion and ranged evasion. You do not get melee evasion. So that is also something that is very important to keep in mind, because that applies to endurance as well. You can notice you get ranged and magic only in here. If you build plate, you get melee and ranged. So you need to be aware also what kind of like item, like in terms of leather, plate, or cloth, what kind of traits you can actually acquire out of them, so that you can build accordingly based on whether you want to like be ranged and magic evasion, ranged and magic endurance, or you want to like counter melee. It's up to what you feel like you are struggling against the most. This is when it comes to your armor pieces. Lastly, your accessories. Every accessory you have, in terms of rank specifically, you will need skill damage boost and buff duration. Those are the most important traits that you will have. Max health is also very important, but skill damage boost and buff duration are extremely important. There are some roles that do not benefit from buff duration, so do be aware of that. You'll be aware of your own role. So if buff duration is simply like if you have a buff, let's say in this instance I'm using the poison, in this case it extends the duration of that poison for me. It applies even to things like selfless diffusion. If I use it, it extends it for me. So this is simply like it increases the duration that your buff is up. So if you are a class that has buffs that you depend on, then buff duration is good for you. If not, then you can just ditch it for something else. However, max health and skill damage boost are important for every single role, even if you are a healer, because skill damage boost does in fact boost your healing as well. So you have max health, skill damage boost, buff duration. In some cases you can go stun chance if you want to, if you are like a great sword user or something like that. Health regen is very bad. Mana regen is good in some cases, like for example in the case of Transcendent Ring, it's one of the traits that is actually pretty good to have. And in terms of your bracelet, that is your defensive accessory, and you'll need max health, debuff duration, and skill damage resistance. These are the top 3 traits. You can obviously opt for something else if you want for your playstyle, like collision resistance or silence resistance. However, as of right now, those are really bad, very low value, and they did even mention that they will look to improve them or buff them or whatever, because of how kind of useless they are, because of how low the percentage that you build is. That is in terms of your built, and in terms of your bracers, those are your defensive ones. In terms of your necklace, this is also an offensive one, so same as your rings. And lastly, in terms of the cape is obviously dependent on what cape you acquire. However, most people go for skill damage resistance, debuff duration, and mana regen for that extra mana regen, because this game is terrible when it comes to mana. If you are somebody that has a lot of wisdom and playing staff, for example bow or staff wand or whatever, and you feel like you don't struggle from mana issues anyway, skip the mana regen. You might go max mana even, because max mana benefits wand, or things like weaken resistance, silence resistance, up to you basically. But keep in mind that silence resistance is only good for staff users, because this only, like, the silence works only against magic, which means staff users are the ones that get hurt by it the most. I feel like this is like pretty much what I need to cover for the most important stuff. You just need to be aware of the fact that not every single piece you will see online is acquirable. You need to look into where to acquire it, and be aware that those dungeons are not going to be available right off the bat, because you will acquire a lot of gear from the open world dungeons. Same for also the lithograph. You need to remember that there is the lithograph book to start crafting your greens, to put greens and craft one blue item. Just be aware not to craft just to craft and make an item just because it's blue. Blue doesn't equal better than green. Some blue can be worse. So just be aware that you're building correctly. Look up proper builds, and whenever you look up a build, do check if they have a build for like early game, mid game, tier 1, all that kind of stuff. Because anybody that tells you, okay, this is like, you know, the business slot build, and you see full purple, full this, full that, that is just troll. You are not going to get any of those pieces. Yeah, the build itself might be good, but what they fail to address to you or give you is the fact that you will not acquire 80% of that build for the first month maybe. But yeah, I hope you made it this far, and if you ended up enjoying this video, found it useful, don't forget to like and subscribe, as I got some more juice coming your way as well the next coming days. And until the next one, peace.